Why do I fall in love with every woman I see who shows me the least bit of attention?
I'm just a fucked up girl who's looking for my own peace of mind. I'm gonna marry you. I know it.
That sounds scary.
I had these fantasies of us being married and having kids and just...
Birth, death, existential speculation, and arguably the most potent, love, defines the climactic and tumultuous moments endured during the human condition. Its overwhelming nature cannot be overstated, as the sheer suffering and vivid ecstasy it encompasses can paralyze human existence. Shared by a passionate yet insecure Clementine, a reserved yet anxious Joel, and an eager yet clueless Mary, the satisfaction, resentment, and regret of their love pressures them to erase their memories to soften the painful grief of living. Eternal sunshine of the spotless mind, however, presents how their eradication of suffering through memory erasure is a detrimental approach to the ill-fated human condition by illustrating the characters' lack of objective judgment and consent, the impracticality posed by the social repercussions of their maintained ignorance, their fragmentation of self-identity, their destructive, escapist, and hedonistic motivations, and their inevitable necessity of suffering for meaningful connection and growth.
Prefrontal lobotomy is a major surgical procedure. 3 fine openings are made close to the coronal suture, either laterally or superiorly.
Ontological idealism, as described by Schopenhauer, paints reality as a thought, with ideas and perceptions constituting the subjective and irrational reality. Through Freud's psychodynamics, the faculties of the mind which creates such subjective ideas and perceptions are fundamentally divided into the conscious, what is in focal awareness, the subconscious, what is not in focal awareness but can be, and the unconscious, what are deep and automatic mind processes which cannot be made aware. Much of consciousness is limited compared to the unconscious workings of the mind, and, like an iceberg, the fraction of active awareness is barely surface level.
Memory works a little bit more like a Wikipedia page. You can go in there and change it, but so can other people.
In tandem with the unreliability of memory, especially when emotionally volatile, which is due to its reconstructive process of biases distorting memory reinterpretation to fit the necessary psychological narrative, the subjective reality is further victim to mischaracterization by manipulative defense mechanisms of repression, denial, and more.
Patrick, baby boy.
Such is the case during Joel's resentment and rage upon the realization that Clementine erased him from her memory, a spark which pushes him to do the same.
No, wait, no, I'm sorry, Doctor, I just barged right in here.
I want it done.
I told him pre-Valentine's Day.
Regretfully, in his emotional stupor, Joel's reality becomes clouded in his negative recollection of his memories with Clementine, which, upon deeper contemplation, he realizes that her annoyances were actually fond quirks.
You erased me. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm doing this in the first place.
I'm sorry.
You.
You know me, I'm impulsive.
That's what I love about you.
Under a certain mindset, the line between his most cherished and most loathed memories becomes blurred.
I don't want this anymore. I want to call it off.
Furthermore, the invasive self-mutilation and self-manipulation of Joel and Clementine's minds to maintain a tolerable condition abandons their conscient duty to treat themselves with respect as free and autonomous individuals rather than a means to an end. Especially troubling is its psychosurgical nature. Like a lobotomized zombie, there is a direct harm to their center for rationality, integrity, and personhood. Mary, upon the realization of her procedure and affair with Howard, experiences tremendous regret, betrayal, and shame, and responds by returning all patient records to restore their lost conscient autonomy.
And in order to correct this, I'm sending everyone's file back to them.
Evidently, the use of memory erasure demonstrates the characters treating themselves as a means to an end, failing to recognize their self-worth, as their emotionally driven reality pushes them to desperation for this technology. The afflicted, therefore, do not possess the objective judgment to consent to the deeply consequential procedure.
And express the truth. Make sure you say what you mean to say. And make sure your meaning is clear to your listeners.
Concerning in itself, the execution of Lacuna's memory erasure technology is rudimentary and negligent. Stan finds himself at the end of both a bottle and a joint. Patrick's hopeless infatuation drives him to manipulate his way into Clementine's heart, and the machine itself is bulky and full of glitches.
Why are there so many wires?
There was something deeply apathetic and disconnected with the employee's self-absorbed carelessness with Joel's most meaningful memories, a commentary on the desensitizational effects of such a sensitive and personal process. Even more problematic are their letters of secrecy, which asks others to maintain the patient's illusions through lying by omission. To illustrate, Rob and Carrie, mutual friends of Joel and Clementine, who were once distantly unrelated to their romantic conflicts, become inevitably entangled with the ethical quandary of lying in their interactions with Clementine to respect her happiness at the cost of their integrity. In Groundwork of Metaphysics of Morals, the categorical imperative, Kant's supreme principle of morality, urges for their actions to express respect to Clementine as an end rather than a means, to respect her wishes rather than conduct action focused solely on their self-interest. However, this conflicts with their similar Kantian duty of self-respect as autonomous and self-defining agents who reject being defined by others by living authentically. Regardless of the consequences, lying remains an absolute moral fault by the same criteria, and it is not, according to Kant, a burden on their conscience when they tell the truth and subject Clementine to shock and grief, much like his murderous acts. The utilitarian option, still, remains heavy with guilt with respect to Carrie, who sympathizes with Clementine's heartbreak and wish to remain happy. Ultimately, if not Clementine, Rob allows for Kant to swing his axe onto Joel's heart, and the sense of responsibility between maintaining either self-respect for Rob or respect for others for Carrie drives a troubling wedge between them, a wedge which could potentially work to separate them like Joel and Clementine.
I agree. It's not about us. It's about Joel, who's an adult, okay? Not Mama Carrie's kid.
Consequently, the power of knowledge creates a power dynamic which imposes bystanders who are largely unaware of the situation of the patients to enforce social justice similar to Rawls' veil of ignorance. Specifically, its liberty principle argues that the social contract should ensure the most liberty possible for everyone without intruding upon the freedom of others. However, issues arise as Joel and Clementine betrayed their Kantian duties by utilizing their autonomous agency to contradictorily sever their own freedom through self-deception and a lack of self-respect. Whether or not it is morally right to reveal this truth by a Kantian or utilitarian perspective, the impractical technological and social consequences of maintaining ignorance harmfully involves unrelated others in an imbalanced power dynamic, one in which they are condemned to an ethical quandary of sacrificing integrity or accord.
Why would she do that to me?
Hey, does anybody want a joint?
I can't, I gotta go home. I'll do it later.
The company responsible for memory erasure, Lacuna, is literally defined as a void and stems from the 17th century Latin word lacus, or lake. A dominant motif in Joel's dream sequences with Clementine, Freud draws parallels between water and the maternal relationship of birth. Particularly, Joel's formative years are exemplified by the childlike wonder of rain and the security of his mother bathing him in the sink. Erik Erikson described that the psychoanalytic method is essentially a historical method, and based on his neo-Freudian psychosocial theory, Clementine shares many characteristics to Joel's mother.
God, I love this kitchen.
Such as her clothing, sense of design, and personality, revealing the source of Joel's romantic attraction for her, the security of motherly attention, or, in an updated context, attention from women. Even the role of his childhood sweetheart, who assured him with comfort and confidence, is directly associated with Clementine. Then, during his final moments in the procedure, the house where Joel and Clementine first met, another Freudian symbol for the self, begins to flood with water ripping the floorboards, or the basis of his identity. These memories are left as a void by Lacuna, and the comfort of water devolves into the danger of drowning. In Joel's desperate attempts to hide Clementine in deep, random memories where he was convinced Lacuna could never find, he is unable to realize that those same places are where, unconsciously, she is the most connected to him.
Oh my darling, oh my darling, oh my darling Clementine.
Following the erasure, he forgets his mother's memorable singing of Huckleberry Hound because it called upon his appreciation for Clementine. a microcosm of his fragmented self.
I don't know any jokes about your name.
Huckleberry Hound.
I don't know what that means.
Huckleberry Hound? Are you nuts?
Clementine too shatters under the rubble of incongruent and incomplete memories when Patrick uses Joel's lines to make her fall in love with him.
I'm lost, I'm scared, I feel like I'm disappearing. My skin's coming off, I'm getting old, nothing makes any sense to me.
Eternal Sunshine's portrayal of personal identity and memory is a Lockean one, that the self is a thinking, intelligent being with the sameness of a rational being. The continuity of personal identity is necessitated by consciousness and memory, which without, doubts are raised whether we are the same thinking thing. As Eternal Sunshine's nonlinear narrative further parallels and emphasizes the chaos of cognitive dissonance and a fragmented self, it is demonstrated that the removal of seemingly innocuous memories unroots deeper and fundamental memories necessary for self-identity. In Anarchy, State, and Utopia, Nozick portrays the short-sighted nature of Benthamite utilitarianism and its hedonism in a thought experiment. Suppose there were an experience machine that would give you any experience you desired. All the time you would be floating in a tank with electrodes attached to your brain. Would you plug in? What else can matter to us other than how our lives feel from the inside?
She's impulsive. She decided to erase you almost as a lark.
The ultimate pursuit of happiness by way of increasing pleasure and decreasing pain comes at the cost of truth, where the bridge is burned between the individual and reality.
Get the fuck away from me!
Can we talk about it?
No, get the fuck away!
For Clementine, Joel, and Mary to subject themselves to ignorance for pleasure is to, in essence, stray into the solipsistic isolation of reality to a greater degree than the aforementioned idealistic reality driven by subjective human psychology and emotion. Alcohol symbolizes these escapist ideas throughout Eternal Sunshine, from Clementine's alcoholism to, more candidly, Howard's relation of brain damage from the procedure to alcoholic overindulgence.
Technically speaking, the procedure is brain damage, but it's on a par with a night of heavy drinking. Nothing you'll miss.
These self-destructive tendencies numb pain temporarily, as the underlying issues exacerbate, and what makes it more agonizing is the repressed and shameful awareness of such. The difficulty of addictive escapism overpowers determined recovery because of the conflict between the fundamental values of desire for happiness and the integrity of truth, where the first tends to veer vacuously and the latter tediously. From the sovereignty of the good, Murdoch responds by affirming the value of clarity. The authority of morals is the authority of truth. The difficulty is to keep the attention fixed upon the real situation, and to prevent it from returning surreptitiously to the self with consolations of self-pity, resentment, fantasy, and despair. It is a task to come to see the world as it is. Indeed, the moral action is to look back on the painful past, as it is the responsibility for one to look at the world with the clarity morality requires. Otherwise, to evade such responsibility is to readmit the same dissatisfaction, resentment, and regret that plagued Joel, Clementine, and Mary to begin with. In these ways, the escapism provided by the hedonistic procedure conflicts with the fundamental value of truth, a necessity to maintaining the clarity that morality and progress demands.
Just show me one thing that human beings are not suffering right now. Just show me one aspect of life that human beings are not suffering right now.
In the end, despite their lack of memory, Joel and Clementine reunite at the same time and place by only an impulse, an emotional and existential call to the void of their identities, that is, Montauk.
I can't stand to even look at him. That pathetic, wimpy, apologetic smile, that sort of wounded puppy shit he does, you know?
Overwhelmed by the recordings of their painful relationship, they nonetheless decide to say okay, and run across the proverbial snowy beach to give their seemingly doomed relationship another chance. As referenced throughout Eternal Sunshine, the influence of Nietzsche is brought to fore with his thought experiment of the eternal recurrence as found in the gay science. What if, this life as you now live it and have lived it, you will have to live once more and innumerable times more, and there will be nothing new in it but every pain and every joy? The question, do you desire this once more and innumerable times more? Here, Nietzsche urges the importance in accepting responsibility for the meaning of our lives by acting in a way that we would want to repeat forevermore. Amor fati, he calls. A love of fate reassures that time spent mourning over past mistakes is another eternity, reliving another painful eternity in this eternal recurrence, and that it is necessary to affirm and embrace one's inevitable actions and suffering for true contentment. Similarly, Joel and Clementine's refusal of Lacuna's offer for a new life by affirming and embracing the suffering endured in their past relationship and repeating their actions demonstrates this same love of fate.
I'm not a concept, Joel. I'm just a fucked up girl who's looking for my own peace of mind. I'm not perfect. And I'll get bored with you and feel trapped because that's what happens with me.
Okay.
Delving deeper, it is important to consider how the idiosyncrasies of Joel and Clementine have undergone resentment and appreciation in fluctuation. Clementine's impulsivity is destructive, like a meteorite on fire, yet it is a shooting star that seduces Joel out of his mundane. And Joel's smile is pathetic and apologetic, like a wounded puppy, yet it is what pacifies Clementine's deep insecurities. Notably, the same characteristics that acted as flaws ending the relationship equally acts as endearing qualities that revitalizes the relationship.
I'm always sort of trying to think, well, what is true, and if it's not, I mean, true to me, you know, and which is all I know, and then sort of, and try to sort of reject the ideas which come from other movies, which is a very hard thing to do because you often don't know that your ideas of a scene or a relationship come from movies, not from your real life.
Instead of lamenting on what could have been and dwelling on the platonic perfection of forms, what Kaufman sought to dismantle of Hollywood's depiction of an infatuation-driven hedonistic model of relationships, they changed their expectations by understanding both the subjectivity of their idealistic realities and the inevitable entanglement of suffering with contentment and identity. Like the ironic pairing of humans as social creatures and their doomed relationships, the rejection of suffering is the rejection of primordial instincts. Painting a nihilistic reality, Joel and Clementine's continued relationship affirms their lives against this by creating their own purpose using these paradoxical truths. The bridge between their realities and perceptions bursts their protective, subjective bubbles in the renewed pursuit of suffering itself, for it is the inescapable atom to their identity and path to contentment. Suffering is inevitably intertwined with the human nature, and its necessity for meaningful connection and growth extends an existential weight that not only supports Eternal Sunshine's philosophical themes, but also the thought-provoking nature of the human condition. Eternal Sunshine demonstrates the multifaceted nature of suffering and our human responses to it. It shows that the procedure of memory erasure, although seemingly desperate, is an alluring promise that calls to our deepest desires and faculties that make us human, reaching into our childhood emotions and memories. It considers the feelings of burden, respect, and autonomy in our most fundamental values of truth and happiness, and shows us how our lonely, sometimes resentful grief can not only impact ourselves but others in ways we had not considered due to our cloudy reality. Although a story about a type of radical science of memory erasure, the timidity and mundane elements of science fiction, from the unpromising offices of Lacuna to the glitches in technology, reveal to us the deeper and uglier subject at hand, the ways we use to cope with reality, from the mindless mess of alcohol to the carefully crafted world of unsustainable infatuation. It calls, ultimately, that the pursuit of pleasure and eradication of suffering is a misguided and dangerous solution to the pain of human existence, and instead we must change our expectations and embrace suffering through love, because we are our suffering, and it is necessary for meaningful growth.
I'm laughing, but you're laughing at me. And I think, oh, how could this be? And I wonder if it could be the same.